Welcome to another episode of the Inside View. My name is Jason Underberg, here with Mr. Brian Kovner.
What's up, everybody?
Today, we have a very special guest. We're going to do what we love to do the most, which most of you love to do most, which is drink alcohol. And I am here with Michael, the brand ambassador for Woodford Reserve. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. Good morning.
Absolutely. You weren't drinking and driving on the way over here or anything, were you?
No, I'm good to go.
All right. We want to have a fresh start here, you know?
It is before noon here today, so we're starting a little early.
Great. So thanks for coming. So tell us, Woodford Reserve, it's a brand that I think a lot of us are familiar with. Tell us a little bit about the history of the brand.
Sure. So Woodford Reserve, I kind of tell everybody we're a contemporary brand. We've only been around since 1996, is when Woodford launched, but we're steeped in the history of bourbon whiskey. So the distillery where we produce Woodford Reserve actually was settled in 1812 by Elijah Pepper and his family. Wow. And distilling really took place on the grounds until the 60s. Changed hands a few times. We had LeBreau and Graham, a French wine merchant and a local Kentucky businessman, bought the distillery from the Peppers in the late 1800s.
Wow.
Brown-Forman actually bought it from them in the 40s and then made spirits on the grounds until the 60s, sold it to a farmer who then let the cows graze, essentially, for almost 40 years. And then Brown-Forman actually, when they decided they wanted to launch a small batch bourbon, which would be Woodford Reserve, they actually bought the property back, renovated it, and started making Woodford Reserve there.
Very cool. Have you been there?
I have, multiple times.
What is it like?
It's absolutely gorgeous. So it actually sits, in the bluegrass hills of Kentucky. There's a couple horse farms that it butts up against. The past two Triple Crown winners are actually retired on the farm next to the distillery. When they bought the farm back to create the Woodford Reserve Distillery, they did a brilliant thing where they didn't tear down and rebuild. They renovated the structures that are there. So there's actually the space where we ferment and distill is where Elijah Pepper's grandson distilled when they sold. So it's actually the oldest active distilling site in the country.
Super cool.
Yeah.
So I'm almost like, when you talk about all this, I'm almost like thinking like kings and queens and bishops and knights. I don't know why I just have this like vision of this castle and like you being like the brand ambassador, right? How does one become the brand ambassador for Woodford Reserve?
It's a great question. My trajectory is a little weird. I graduated from college in 2005 and I did corporate America, white shirt, suit and tie stuff for most of my 20s. And then when I turned 29, I quit everything and started bar backing and canned beer at a brewery. And just knew I wanted to maybe open a bar one day.
Okay.
And then that just led to progressions in my career. I moved to New York 5 years ago with my wife. She's in the industry as well. I competed in the Manhattan Experience, which is an international competition we have every year. I am a 3-time regional runner-up to that award. I've lost to my friend twice. And then I moved to New York.
I'm sure New York's a tough market for a competition like that.
So I lost once in Indianapolis, where I moved from, and then I lost twice in New York, all by within a vote or a handful of points. But I developed a great relationship with the brand ambassador. There's always opportunities to consult or develop cocktails for the brands or, all those things. So I just said yes when those requests came in and developed a relationship. So when Walter left the job, reached out and said, hey, I think you'd be great at this position. And Woodford has been at graduations and funerals and bonfires my whole life. So it kind of just made sense to just align with me.
That's awesome. Yeah. Very cool. So, being the brand ambassador for Woodford, I would imagine you drink a lot of bourbon.
Yes.
So without being too biased, tell me, why do you believe that Woodford is just as crisp and clean and whatever the right adjective is of a bourbon?
So I think there's a lot of things that go into that answer, and I'll do my very best to be brief on those. So Chris Morris, who's our master distiller, when he really started developing this brand, he wanted to pay homage to the history, right? I think it goes back to how we were founded, but also the production process. If you look at the bottle, the bottle's beautiful, right? It's very distinct. It has that high-end, feel to it, right? We live in that premium expression. That's the universe that Woodford operates in. But when you look at, we are still pulling the water from the well that's underneath the distillery that the Peppers found in the 1800s. We're still using that groundwater, which is huge. We are fermenting for an extra 3 days versus everybody else, which gives us really fruity floral notes that are really unique to us. We are the only American whiskey distiller that is triple copper pot distilling, which is a traditional method used in Irish whiskey and Scotch.
Okay.
So that gives us a unique flavor profile there. We control the barrels. We're the only distillery that owns the cooperage the barrels are made in. So we are in control from the minute they're planted to harvested to transported to seasoned to toasted. I mean, we control every bit of that. We're heat cycling. There's all kinds of things we're doing that allow us to provide a whiskey that is the most balanced whiskey in the world.
So if they're not controlling the barrels, they're at the mercy of whatever who was using it before, what's in it. Like they don't have control over that process.
Well, not so. American bourbon whiskey specifically has to be new charred oak, right? So you're not necessarily getting a used barrel, but you are, and you're dictating to the cooperage you're using. A lot of them are using a company called Independent Stave in Kentucky. You are dictating your char levels, but you're not really in control of anything else.
Right.
You know, you really are just kind of getting what they get. So we're pulling from 3 different forest stations. We know the terroir of those areas. We're seasoning it ourselves. We developed a proprietary system of toasting that others are doing now, but we're really the first American whiskey to do that, where we're heating the wood up before we char it because we're activating the sugar. Because you're getting 100% of your color and 50% of your flavor comes from the wood. So it's a very vital piece of the equation. So by being in control of it,
wood.
yeah, I mean it's 100%.
Well,
I mean it's what allows products like Double Oak to exist. Right?
Sure.
If we didn't own those barrels, or we're using a brand new oak barrel again, the cost of that, if we weren't in control, we wouldn't be able to produce the product.
Makes sense. So being the ambassador again, I'm just hung up on the word ambassador.
I like the emphasis
Can you
you're
talk
putting
a
on it.
little
Yeah,
bit about
I feel like he should be wearing like a crown.
Well, like maybe
of some sort.
for folks watching at home that aren't familiar, what exactly? I know your role varies day to day,
Sure.
minute by minute, but what would you say the high level
Other than
parts
walking
are?
around with your throne, of course.
that a brand ambassador
And the
does?
ambassador crown that I have. I mean, realistically, the brand developed this position to engage with the trade, to engage with bartenders, with bar managers. You know, the craft cocktail world is a focus for us for sure. We call it on-premise, right? Bars and restaurants.
Right.
And more of a marketing role. You know, we want to be there to support those people as they kind of progress in their own careers, right? You know, so it's the idea is I want you to like me enough that you're pouring Woodford when I'm not in the bar.
Yep.
Do you know what I mean?
Not just in front of you.
Right. Somebody calls it an old fashioned, you're grabbing a Woodford Reserve.
Right.
Versus that. You know, obviously those roles have transitioned, right? We were coming out of COVID. So obviously that's a massive change. You know, we are consumer focused. We are looking at driving the brand. We're doing things like this, which I think are great to get the name out there. So it's, you know, it's a little bit of everything, but really it's a marketing role that's there to help just
Very
make
cool.
people like us.
Yeah.
And as the brand ambassador, do you have like perks? Like, do you have an unlimited supply of Woodford at home? Like, when you open your fridge, is it just Woodford everywhere?
No. That is
I'm sure you got some water
That's
and
not
juice
the case. Yeah. Don't put bourbon in the fridge. Let me just say that. It might have a little bit of effect on it, but no, it's not nothing necessarily like that. You know, I think the job, truthfully, has taught me a lot about responsibility. You know, in the sense of that it's work, right? I learned that very early on in the job. It's like it's in this space, and then I have my own life outside of that, which has been huge. But I mean, you know, as far as like being able to take people out and entertain and you know, get paid essentially to go have a dinner or activate with the polo bar, or public rooftop, like those types of things, like. Yeah, those are moments when you're like, I get paid to do this. Like,
this is great.
It's incredible,
Yeah.
right? You know, I don't know that my parents would have understood when I was almost 30 and I said
Probably
I was quitting,
not.
You know, that I would end up in New York as the brand ambassador.
Yeah, and they might have told you, like, this isn't a real job.
That was a lot
You
of
don't
that.
drink booze
There was
for
a lot
a
of
living.
what are you doing kind of moments, you know what I mean? So
I think they said that to me when I started a magazine.
Yeah.
They were like, what are you doing? You
Yeah.
can't start a magazine.
It was very much. I had a girlfriend that left very quickly when I decided to start over.
Now look at her. She's probably like, why did I go? Cool. So we're going to make some drinks, right?
Yep.
Because I'm getting a little thirsty. I'm sure Brian's getting a little thirsty.
Yeah, always.
So what are we going to make today?
So we are going to do a couple of classic cocktails and then a really nice, easy kind of summer refresher. So we're going to work on a Woodford wheat highball. So
Okay.
wheat whiskey is one of our newest expressions. It's just a very nice, light, refreshing cocktail to have on this rooftop summertime. We're going to do a classic Manhattan cocktail.
Okay.
With the classic build. So 2 bitters, 1 vermouth, 2 Woodford.
Cool.
So if you just remember the area code to Manhattan, you'll always know the recipe to a Manhattan cocktail.
212.
212. And then an old fashioned. I mean, it's the number one.
One of our favorites.
I would argue it's probably the number one cocktail outside of a margarita.
What do you always say,
on
Brian?
the planet.
You know what? I'll have an old fashioned.
I'll have an old fashioned, and but not because you're here. You'll agree with this. I mean, for
100%.
years and years, we would order with
Old,
Woodford.
yes.
No,
And,
but
I
they'd ask
appreciate
what
that.
bourbon,
and
right?
an old
I mean,
fashioned with Woodford. We would constantly, he and I we always had this little
100%,
joke. We would go to a
yeah.
steakhouse. I'd order, you know what? I'm going to have an old fashioned.
I would look at the
And-
menu. I would have an idea. I would say I'm going to get a glass of wine. He'd order an old fashioned. I'd be like, you know what? I'll have an old fashioned. And then we would always say with Woodford.
Yeah, and I think we're going to dive into this too when we get back about why Woodford is such a perfect bourbon whiskey for those types of cocktails. So, and it, inevitably working in craft cocktail bars, people would come in and it's kind of like the, when you go to fast food and people look at the menu and they act like they don't know what they want.
Right.
We get a lot of that too in the cocktail world. People will look at the menu and you could just see them gloss over, and then they're just like old-fashioned.
Right.
Doing
They already knew what they were going to order.
You know it's beautiful. You know it's a great cocktail.
Absolutely.
Simple.
Can't go wrong.
Absolutely.
Test of time for a reason.
And isn't it one of the more favorite drinks for a bartender to make? I've heard that it really kind of shows your craft, if you will.
I think that an old-fashioned allows you, and a Manhattan too to some degree, allow you an opportunity to kind of put your spin on it.
Right.
Daiquiris
You're
are
not
like that too.
restricted, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, there's a everyone has their own version of an old-fashioned or old version of a Manhattan they like. So anytime a guest says, "Hey, how do you like your old-fashioned, or how do you like your Manhattan or your daiquiri, or whatever?" It is kind of a cool moment to be able to, maybe give them something they wouldn't have thought to have before, and kind of show who you are a little bit as a bartender. Sure.
Very cool.
That's awesome.
Well, I'm ready to try it. Let's go make some drinks.
Great.
All right, Mike, so now that you've showed off your bartending skills to us and we've got these 3 beautiful drinks, let's go ahead and dive in. We've got the Highball.
Yep.
Before Brian, we're going to let Brian do the honors here.
I'll start
takes
it
the takes the test here. You want to talk about the Highball?
Sure. So, I mean, the Highball, I think, has seen a bit of a resurgence in the last couple of years. I don't know if that's from bartenders ordering it, because it's kind of just a nice way to have a few ounces of a spirit and then just some soda water to kind of stretch it out so you can kind of enjoy the all of the day versus, maybe going a little too hard too early. So we use the Woodford wheat in this expression. So wheat whiskey is a unique whiskey category. It doesn't really exist. Like it's a straight wheat whiskey is a government regulated expression of whiskey, but just not a lot of people are doing it. And so when Chris did it, what it does is we talked about the fermentation a little bit ago, about how much longer we ferment. So fruity flavors like tropical notes and red fruit comes through in our fermentation. So wheat as a grain is really neutral. There's not a lot of flavor to it. So it lets the fermentation flavor notes shine through in the final product.
Got it.
So I think it's a really great summertime whiskey because it's a little bit lighter, it's a little softer, it's fruity, and that's why we did a couple little strawberries on top, because I just think that's what I get when I drink it, and it's just a nice, crushable summertime cocktail.
Let's see.
Brian,
Let's
open
go.
up your palate.
Is there a special way to drink it, or do I eat the strawberries first?
I mean, I put the strawberries in it, and then that's kind of at the
I
end.
agree,
You know what I
yeah.
mean? It's a fun little treat. Similar to the cherries in the
gonna go
Manhattan.
Yeah, it's gonna go over.
Watch
I'm
it.
gonna make some more room in a second.
I mean, since we are cousins, I'm going to go ahead and get a swig of that too.
And
That's
the wheat,
really good.
The
I
wheat being lighter too, I think it plays well with soda. So it's also a very approachable cocktail, right? So I think for me,
Very nice.
It scratches both sides of the fence, right? It's for whiskey drinkers that want a highball, but it's also for maybe you don't drink whiskey a lot, but you want to try it or you want to get into it. It's a great way to kind of get started because it's a soft whiskey on one side and the soda water stretches it out too,
Right.
Which makes it really easy to drink.
It's good.
It's a perfect day, summer drink.
It doesn't
Absolutely.
sting the nostrils.
No. I like it.
Yeah, good.
Fantastic. All right, so now we've got, we're going to actually jump over here. We'll
Yep.
jump over to the old fashioned.
So the old fashioned, right? We talked about this a minute ago about, you could put your own spin on it. Mine's a really simple spin. I don't do anything too crazy, but I do add orange bitters to mine. I just picked that up from my first cocktail bar, the Libertine Liquor Bar in Indianapolis, and we did 2 parts bourbon, half an ounce. I do a quarter because I don't really like a lot of sweet, so a quarter ounce. I did sugarcane syrup, which is a little bit richer too, so it's going to actually kind of give you a nice mouthfeel. 2 dashes of Angostura and then 3 dashes of Regan's orange bitters. So it's a little bit different, nothing too crazy, but it's one of those things where the old fashioned a lot of times.
This is good.
It's great, right?
This is really good. This has my name all over it.
And for me, when it comes to these drinks, simple is is the way to go, right? I think when you start getting into
excellent.
muddled cherries or soda waters, or in Wisconsin
Yeah.
they do like a Sprite on top. It's crushed ice. It can get a little complicated.
I mean,
I'm not even blowing. I'm not even.
No, I
blowing.
wasn't expecting it. We didn't have a chance
I'm not
to
even
try
blowing
these.
smoke up your ass.
We were watching you make these for a while,
Old
and-
fashions. I mean, this is This is really good.
So
And it's not too sweet. I mean, how many times do you have an old fashioned and
Yeah.
it just it's too sweet.
I think
Yeah,
you
this
get
is
it
really
once you
good.
get into half an ounce or more of simple syrup or any kind of sugar. It already kind of goes that way, because bourbon does tend to be a little sweet with the corn base. What's unique about Woodford, and we'll talk about it with the Manhattan too, is that we have 18% rye, so it's a high rye bourbon, and rye is a grain that gives you spice. So one, our bourbon is balanced on all 5 areas of flavor because of all of the things we talked about earlier with the production, right? So you've got fruity floral, sweet aromatic, spice, wood, and grain notes. So our bourbon is equal across all of those. Our rye is out of balance to spice. Our wheat is out of balance to fruity floral. So like out of balance isn't a bad thing, but because the bourbon is balanced and it is a high rye, it makes a lot of sense in these classic cocktails that were originally developed with rye whiskey, because it still has enough of that spice backbone to stand up in it. And then like I said, cutting the sugar down a little bit, I think lets the whiskey kind of shine.
Yeah,
which I think is
it's
super
fantastic. It really is.
important. Good.
Wow.
All right, and
glad you
last
like
but
it.
certainly not least, we've got here the Manhattan.
The Manhattan. So this, I mean, I live in Manhattan. It's the cocktail that started it all. It's what the competition's focused around, and it's really what Woodford was, just born to be a part of. And in this case, I just gave you the simple 2-1-2 recipe that we talked about earlier, right? The Manhattan area code. So it's 2 dashes of Angostura, 1 part sweet vermouth. That's Martini Rossi, I believe in that. And then 2 parts or 2 ounces of the Woodford Reserve bourbon. Now, I also did a lemon expression, and I gave you cherries, because I don't understand why you can't have both in this world. I don't get it. When I just feel like it, and I served it up just as a traditional serve to put that myth to bed too. If you want to have it on rocks, like, it's your world. I feel like as a bartender, I've learned that you give the guests what they want. So I just like it served up.
I like it up. I feel like it lasts a little longer too.
Mm-hmm.
Very good.
Yeah, it's just a nice classic cocktail. Once again, the rye kind of stands up in that, so it cuts through the vermouth, which I think is super important. But there's also a little bit of sweetness there. We have to be honest about the American palate, which does tend to be on the sweeter side of things when it comes to cocktails. So having a bourbon makes sense there, but having enough rye to stand up satisfies the classic cocktail drinker as well.
Yeah.
And then go ahead.
So 3 classic drinks, all great for summer. I mean, in my opinion, all good for year round.
Yep.
Especially the old fashioned.
Yep.
There's never not a good time to drink an old fashioned. But moving into fall, which September is around the corner, unfortunately. Tell us about some drinks that are a little bit more fall inspired.
Sure. So, not to toot the horn of the Manhattan again, but once again, as it starts to chill, the Manhattan is a cocktail that you can absolutely have during that time. I think that's great. I think you get into one of my favorite kind of forgotten cocktails is a VUE, which is kind of like a Manhattan old fashioned got together and had a baby, and that's what this cocktail is. So it's equal parts rye, and then it's brandy or cognac.
Okay.
But our double oaked, which we haven't really talked about, actually has a flavor profile that aligns with that. There's coffee and hazelnut and caramel and all these really cool flavors in it. So I do 1 part rye, 1 part double oaked, and then 1 part sweet vermouth. And then there's a bar spoon of Benedictine, which is like this really herbal liqueur essentially. And then Peychaud's bitters and Angostura bitters. And you stir it up, and it's this beautiful, spirit-forward stirred cocktail that's absolutely fantastic. We have an expression of Woodford malt whiskey, a straight malt whiskey, which is another one that kind of fell away after Prohibition. Prohibition ends, and we get back to making whiskey, and distillers are looking for what's easily accessible. And so corn and rye really kind of dominated and have continued to. Malt was the whiskey that was around before that. Malt's difficult to work with, hard to find, expensive, etc. We launched that product about 4 years ago, and you get this chocolatey, nutty milk ball, like malted milk ball finish to it, which is just a unique expression in general. You start getting into, obviously toddies are a huge thing. We had a lot of success last year with a double oaked hot chocolate, which is another one. If you can find like a really good quality drinking chocolate, it's the shorter one. So the double oaked is actually, so our Woodford Reserve bourbon spends 5 to 7 years in a barrel. that's got a 10-minute toast and a 25-second char on it. We talk about toasting, waking up the sugars in the wood, and then the char really is a carbon's filter in the barrel. It just helps make sure that everything kind of mellows as it ages. And then after 5 to 7 years, some of it goes into another new oak barrel, but that barrel, instead of a 10-minute toast, gets a 40-minute toast and gets a flash char, so it still checks the box as one of the rules of bourbon. And that additional 30 minutes of toast is where all the caramel and toffee and hazelnut and all those flavors come through, because all those chemical compounds are found in the wood. So if you hold those up next to each other, the bourbon and the double oaked.
These two.
The one in your left hand and the, yep, nope. There you go. Yep. It's the same exact liquid, but it just spends up to 12 months.
Much darker.
In another barrel, and it turns into double oaked.
Isn't that crazy?
And
Much
that
darker.
is where I think you get into some of those, when you get into winter cocktails, it just
Right.
plays the flavor profile between our double oaked and our malt just pairs so well in any type of
So
cocktail.
as the
you're gonna do
seasons
in the winter.
progress, we get a little darker.
Yeah, I
or,
think
taste buds.
Woodford should be on a back bar at every single bar in the world, full stop. I mean,
I
it's
agree.
the bartender's
Yeah.
Swiss Army knife. It works for every kind of cocktail you can think about. Double oaked is great for a premium expression. If somebody wants something new they haven't had. And then really, wheat and malt, as the seasons change, right? As it gets colder, malt can come on the back bar and ride you through to the spring, and then wheat becomes the whiskey on the back bar through the summer. And I think that, rye works a ton in craft cocktail bars where rye whiskey is a big call. So we got a little bit of something for everybody, and we're the only distillery that makes all 4 straight whiskeys. So that's another thing that we kind of hang our hat on as far as, we took the time to produce all 4, in the best way. Everything's the same exact alcohol proof. Everything is at 90.4. Everything we put out except for our batch proof once a year, because we want you to be able to taste the difference in the grains. We want you to be able to taste the difference in the barrel, and so it's...
And you can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
And this is a drink that, obviously it's great with the cocktails, but you can also drink it on the rocks.
Yeah,
We've done it and just drink it
absolutely.
straight up,
And
yeah.
I think that's I encourage everybody to try it neat once, just to see what it's about. But also that age old, what's the right way or the wrong way? I get that question a lot. There isn't one. Really, it's about your
What's the
preference.
right way for ice? There has to be a right way, because unfortunately we got the cubes, but the
Single cube.
that single cube
Yeah,
is the
I mean-
way. Would you agree? Or?
Yeah, I mean, if you have a big dense piece of ice that's not going to melt as fast,
Right.
right? And there's obviously more surface area to chill the spirit down. That's 100% the way to
why
go.
doesn't every bar do that? It's
Well,
like-
I think there's one, the machines are expensive,
Okay.
right? I think that's a huge thing. Not everybody has access.
That's fair.
And there
Yeah.
are ice companies that will deliver, but that's also expensive, and you've got to be in a major metropolitan area to do that. But for a home bartender, I mean, there's silicone. If you
I
just
have those at home.
go on
You put 'em in
Amazon
your
and
freezer,
do 2
yeah,
by
call it a
2,
day. Yeah.
gives you the big ones. 1 by 1 will give you the ones that look like the square ice cubes that bartenders use at craft bars. It's called cold draft, but you can do 1 by 1 molds. Those are on Amazon. I mean, you can find them for a home bar for
right,
sure.
the molds, yeah.
Amazon.com.
Yeah, I don't know if they're a sponsor or not, but
They don't need to sponsor.
It's always a nice surprise though, when you order a drink. Are you gonna get it with a single cube or not?
Yeah.
And
And I mean, I remember where I was the first time I had clear ice in an old fashioned, right? And it was at Pepe La Mocha in Portland, Jeffrey Morgenthaler's bar, and it's this little basement bar. It had like a bomb shelter, like Cuban kind of vibe too. It was kind of crazy. And I ordered an old fashioned, and it was $18, right? And this was probably 7 years ago,
Wow.
and I was like, why on earth? But I was like, it's got to be the best thing I've ever had.
Right.
Right.
And it came out, and it was the first time. I'll just never forget it. It'll always be a memory I have of, like, I could see my hand through the glass and then, down the middle. It was incredible. And it was like, I ordered 3. You know what I mean? Because it was
See,
such
any
an
bartender's
impressive,
watching,
an impressive experience. And so I think that's, those are the
It really
things
is.
that
Yeah.
separate. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Anything we missed?
I don't know. I feel like I've been talking nonstop, so I hope people are still listening.
Oh, they're still watching. They're still watching.
Or they're drinking along.
Yeah.
And we've got a lot more. We're excited to feature some of the cocktails we've talked about and a deeper dive, and you can even make them at home. In the next issue of VUE Magazine, our fall issue, we're going to focus on a couple of cocktails that we would recommend and you would recommend
Great.
for the fall.
Yeah. Mike, this was fun, man.
Yeah. Thank you so much for
We're going
having
to
me.
finish
This
these
has been
off
great.
camera, of course.
Well, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely, my
Mike,
pleasure.
Brand ambassador for Woodford Reserve.
Now you think of like a count. What do you think of the ambassador?
So we're gonna Photoshop a crown on you. Yeah, it's like, oh! It was a pleasure having you, bro.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
And
Thank
thanks
you
for
very
watching,
much.
guys. All right, from all of us here at the Inside View, we'll see you next time.
We'll see you next time.